What this war is most remembered for are the mass beheadings. Every time an Ottoman army would march into a town, city or village, all men aged 14 to 50 were gathered together in the town square and beheaded as the town was forced to watch.
Oh my... Yo! Oh! Chapter 4. Honestly, I'm loving this series. The Turkish Century. I'm honestly loving it.
It is often somewhat hard
Even
to
though
detect and find the reason.
I have a bit of insecure... Not all Turkish people, but some of them can be a bit insecure. But aside from that, I'm honestly liking this. I honestly... My reactions to Turkey and like Turkish history are typically some of my favorite type of reactions to do. Even though a lot of people wouldn't believe me, but
for why an
it
empire
is.
collapses. First and foremost, it is something that is in our day and age very easily exploited for very cheap political nonsense shots. The Roman Empire is a great example of this. I am sure many of you have seen that Michael Moore movie, where he draws comparisons between the supposed decadence of the late Roman Empire and the United States, or some drooling right-wing YouTuber claiming immigration caused the Roman Empire to collapse. However, when the Roman Empire collapsed,
Well, I mean, it did, but emigration, in the sense of, it was different, right? Like, by definition, yes, barbarians outside of the empire emigrated to and inside of the empire, and that would kind of lead to the collapse, right? After the Huns kind of like forced them to migrate. So yeah, but I know what he's saying, but I'm just saying, like, by definition, that still is immigration. But I know, some right-wing people just try and distort it and make it seem like immigration in Europe. Honestly, my personal opinion on immigration in Europe, it's very sad. It's actually quite unfortunate. A lot of these people, they come from their countries, and a lot of them don't adhere to European culture. Like, in certain countries, of course, wherever they go, they don't like to adhere to that country's culture, customs, tradition. They don't want to assimilate. They don't want to do any of that. They bring their nonsense from their country. Not all of them do this, but a lot of them tend to do this. They bring their nonsense from their country and, come to some European countries and do that, right? I mean, like, a lot of Middle Eastern people, not like Turkish, but when I say Middle Eastern, I'm talking like from Arabia, right? A lot of people from the Arabian Peninsula, and North Africa, not all, but a lot of them just have extremist views, and they bring that, right? They don't get rid of that. It's the good old saying, as you move the girl from the trailer park, but the trailer park haven't left her, right? Like, you could flee from Syria, but Syria hasn't left you. So a lot of them, a lot of unfortunate things have happened because of that. I remember one where I saw a French teacher had his head decapitated by a Muslim because of like the way, because he showed Prophet Muhammad in a book, in a kid's book in France, because he took offense to that. And I'm like, bro, what the hell? I'm like, it's France. It's not your country. It's France, bro. Maybe even then, decapitation is wild. Like, sure, if you are in your country, you want to take offense to that, but it's France, dude. France has different culture and customs and tradition. But again, I don't know what country that person was from, but clearly they left that country, but that country didn't leave them, right? If you understand what I mean by that phrase, right? It's like the mindset, bro. It ain't changed. But that's how I feel about immigration. And then the African immigration, it's like, bro, That's just due to European over-exploitation of Africa. Honestly, same thing with the Middle East. A lot of these Middle Eastern countries are just due to the West and its shenanigans. But Africa, you know, yeah, they're like, not all of them, of course, but you know, I just think what they're doing is making a bad reputation. Like it's a bad reputation for black people. That's how I feel about that personally. Like that's why whenever I see people in my comments, oh, you're African, I'm like, yeah, no, don't call me that. Don't call me that. Because we in the Caribbean, we go to Europe. Sometimes we go to Europe, but we go back home. We let me say that again. We go back home. And statistics show this. Like I remember I was talking with a dude, and he thought because I was from the Caribbean, I was black or whatever. Like he thought I was like one of those people, one of those migrants from Europe. I'm like, yeah, no. I'm like, nah, pal. Like two different things. And Caribbean people are in a whole different group, like officially speaking, than like those Africans in, you know, Africa, right? You can go look this up if you don't believe me. Like Caribbean people typically go back home to whatever country they go to. We only go just to get a better education or whatnot, and then we just go back home because our countries aren't bad. Plenty of time. In fact, me and my family, we are actively starting to think about how we're gonna go back home to Barbados from America right now. So yeah, no, Caribbean people go back home. We don't cause problems with nobody. So this is why I hate when people overgeneralize like all black people. I'm like, yeah, no, don't do that.
It was at the height of Christianity's power in the empire, when most of the things we consider to be decadent had been abolished. And the Romans purposefully sought out the conquest and settling of foreign peoples who they could then use as a resource. The list of reasons for why this empire collapsed is immensely long, and many of these reasons are often overlooked by hacks who seek to make cheap political points. By the 3rd century, the wealthiest Romans had basically stopped paying taxes, which made paying large armies to patrol the borders close to impossible. There is the in a previous chapter mentioned recurve bow, the fact that the Romans offered the Goths lands as vassals in exchange for an alliance against the Huns, and after defeating the Huns betrayed that promise, to which the Goths reacted by pillaging Roman lands. The fact that the Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius invaded and sacked the West because it tolerated non-Christians and even appointed them as senators, a war from which the West barely recovered. This leads us to one of the most overlooked reasons, the increasing fanaticism of the Roman Christian churches, which in the final century of Rome's existence persecuted non-Christians and made such incredibly wise decisions as declaring bathing, and by that extent personal hygiene, to be a satanic ritual. Gee, I wonder where all those late Roman plagues came from. In summary, there's a long list of reasons for why some nations fail, and some of these reasons are unfortunately easily.
Speaking of hygiene, I saw this African person on TikTok, and he claimed that Africans showed Europeans how to shower. I'm not sure how true that is, though, but just throwing that out there. Because that didn't really make sense to me. I was like, Africans showed Europeans hygiene. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense because, well, we saw that the Romans here were bathing. Well, used to before the superstition came and, you know, stopped that. But I'm like, but bathing was clearly a thing in Europe beforehand. So he said like the Moors or something. I don't know. I've heard about the Moors, but I don't know much detail about them. Low-key, I just thought that was just Afrocentric propaganda and like Afro BS. So I never really like bothered looking into that. Maybe I might look into it, but I don't know. Have you guys heard of that? Like Africans taught Europeans how to shower? Well, Western Europeans, I should better say, because that's what he was referring to. Because I know Eastern European, like, well, are Rus anyways. I'm not sure about the other Slavs, but like the Slavs in what's now Russia, like they were they had a sense of hygiene and keep it clean. So
and others easily overlooked. History is never simple, and the reason for why historic events happen are also often never simple. When it comes to the Ottoman Empire in popular history, the moment mostly used as the supposed beginning of the decline is the failed siege of Vienna. But that is really not the moment to realistically choose. This was an extraordinary event, one of the few moments where European states that usually were enemies were able to unite in a common cause. So it makes for a nice story, something that sounds nice and appeals to visions that people may have of the past and present as civilizational struggles between vague concepts of cultures. But it leaves out a fundamental fact, which is that even after this defeat, the Ottoman Empire was still at the peak of its strength and would remain a powerhouse for almost 2 more centuries. Let me instead posit to you 3 alternative reasons for why the Ottoman Empire declined. Technological, geographic, and social. The compass, the cross-staff, and the carvel. The compass helped you know where you were going. The cross-staff helped you figure out where you are. And the carvel was a way to build a ship that allowed it to go faster, with more cargo, and deep into the oceans. Suddenly, those vast pits of certain doom and death turned into free highways, and those highways led to new lands, which in their turn brought something new to Europe. The potato, the tomato, and corn. These new cash crops were not as frail and vulnerable as wheat. The Europeans suddenly had their own bread baskets that could sustain a surplus in food, and the technological advances in deep-water navigation also impacted geography, not physically, but its usefulness. If you wanted to buy Chinese silk or Indian spices, you had to pay the tariff set by the Chinese, Mughals, Safavids, Ottomans, and Venetians. These products ended up being luxuries due to the resulting large price tag, and the Ottomans controlled that trade route, so a lot of the money went to them. Then the Portuguese simply...
Yeah, I know what he's gonna say here. Yeah, that's why the Ottoman Empire declined. Because Europeans just bypass them. Yeah, I know that.
Please sailed around Africa and them, cutting out all the middlemen and bringing vast fortunes. The strategic importance of the Mediterranean, which had helped the Ottomans so much, was suddenly a trap. Now they were closed in and limited by that small ocean and couldn't break out into the open oceans. This brings us to a battle and a war which I believe were more significant.
Lepanto. It has to be Lepanto. Yep.
Than the siege of Vienna. For the Ottomans to break out
the Battle of Lepanto,
they would have to conquer and control the entire Mediterranean. So they went to war with Venice, the Papal States, Genoa, and Spain, and were shattered at the Battle of Lepanto.
Yep.
The recently developed new naval technologies proved their worth. The massive and powerful Ottoman navy that had controlled the Mediterranean for centuries consisted of rowing galleons, meant to board enemy vessels and fight hand to hand. Spain sailed in with cannon-laden sailing galleons that laid waste to the outdated Ottoman navy.
Wow! That is insane. So they were using rowing boats, basically, rowing ships against freaking galleys with freaking oh my gosh, bro. It's like when you don't upgrade in civilization, bro. It's like when you don't upgrade in Civilization 6, bro. That's what happens when you don't upgrade to the current tech. But why didn't the Ottomans realize that they needed to? Then again, I think by the time they would have realized, it would have been well too late, because the Europeans had a head start because they were right next to the ocean. Now that I think about it, so yeah, that actually does make sense why the Ottomans didn't upgrade. It wouldn't have been as obvious.
Dominance of the Mediterranean was thereby broken, and they were restricted to a sphere of influence around the easternmost parts of the Mediterranean. Another path to break out was through the Gulf into trying to dominate and seize control of the Indian Ocean. This resulted in a 20-year war with the Portuguese-Ethiopian alliance, which the Ottomans lost. Trapped by the limitations of their geography and technology, the Ottomans...
I did not know that. I did not. I was actually curious why the Ottomans didn't try that. Wow. That answers my question.
Became prisoners of their own empire, unable to expand beyond its limitations. But there's also a social change which contributed to eventually undermining the Ottoman Empire. This is St. Hedwig's Cathedral in Berlin. It's just one of many cathedrals all across many European cities, but this one is somewhat special, starting construction under Frederick II of Prussia, intent as being a temple for all religions to share as a common house of worship. It would be the first Catholic cathedral in a Protestant land. Gradually, after a few centuries of slaughtering each other over who was worshipping the right god, Europeans realized that this was silly and instead found other silly reasons to slaughter each other. But the extreme religious intolerance that had existed in prior centuries started to gradually wither away. The Ottomans thereby started losing their monopoly on tolerance. In 1774 came a massive hit to the Ottoman prestige when they were defeated by the Russians in war. The Russians annexed Ottoman lands in the Ukraine and the Crimea, but there's an often overlooked part of this war that arguably might have done even more damage. The peace agreement included a clause that assigned and guaranteed to Russia the role of being the protector of Christians within the Ottoman Empire. And by that extent, since the Ottoman Sultan was also the Caliph, Russia was the protector of Christianity in the entire Islamic world. If you were a Christian in the Ottoman Empire, you were suddenly not only able to find the same degree of condescending tolerance abroad, but you now had nations abroad that took a vested supposed interest in your well-being, who stood up for you against your overlord in case said overlord may act capriciously against you, or at least on the surface. In reality, this clause was more of a crowbar with which Russia could insert itself into Ottoman affairs as a justification for future wars. Nonetheless, this started changing minds. Why
I'm sorry. That picture of Putin, bro. That was funny. That was funny. That was funny.
Should I pay more taxes, be denied equal legal protection, and live my life being constantly degraded as a heretic to a dominant faith? And the final nail in the coffin of the Ottoman social structure came from France, when the French beheaded their king, had somewhat of a revolution, and declared the emancipation of the Jews, with proclaiming that all men were equal, that all had inherent equal rights and liberties no matter their background, ethnicity, faith, or lack thereof. There is a difference between being tolerated and having rights, and with this event, the Ottoman Islamic social structures turned to many into an outdated relic of the past.
I like to keep my videos 30 minutes. Plus, I like this reaction, so and the series.
In 1725, he left behind a last will and testament, unlike any other Tsars before him. It was meant to be shown not just to his direct successor, but to be read by each and every single Tsar or Tsarina after him the moment they ascended to the throne. It wasn't something that he had left behind for them, but a simple instruction: go and conquer Constantinople. The 1800s were a century of imperial expansion and nationalist separatism. Powerful states and ideas would equally come down on the Ottomans with intense pressure. And even though they would try to reform and revive their dying empire, they would find themselves unable to avert disaster. The ideas which the French Revolution had spawned of men as equals, a people's right to self-determination, as well as nationalism, came to be the first thing to bite the Ottomans when the Greeks rebelled during their revolution of the 1820s. Foreign interests, however, also played a role in this. The Greeks were initially losing their revolution until foreign powers saw use in a weakened Ottoman Empire and sent their fleet.
I just finished reacting to the Greek War of Independence. Go watch it after this reaction. That was also a really good series. That was a really excellent series. Whether you're a Turk or Greek or whatever, go watch it. Go watch the reaction to it. It was quite excellent.
To help the Greeks achieve victory. This was the tipping point. For the first time, a people under Ottoman rule had risen in revolt against its imperial overlords and won their independence. It showed to all the others what was possible. It showed the Europeans that they could expand their influence over the Ottoman Empire by supporting separatism. It showed the Arabs that their overlords were weaker than expected and beatable. Until this moment, the Ottomans might have even still had a
kind of ironic, because the Arabs would eventually make I mean, the Arabs were overlords themselves, and then they eventually became subjected. It's funny how I see Arabs complaining about European colonialism, but I don't see them complaining anything about like Ottoman rule. Strange. And they were the ones who revolted. That's the thing. Before you say like, oh, but the Ottoman rule wasn't. No, but they revolted. Like, I know the Arabs were discontent with Ottoman rule. Like, I know they did not like it. Why would they revolt in the first place, right? In World War One, right? So, but I don't see them complaining as much. I even pointed out in my Epic History TV World War One video that I see people like Arabs would say, "Oh, the British lied to us about their promise." They kind of did, like they kind of didn't, though. Like, it's just that the whole promise, like, they didn't get like what they expected, and the Arabs also knew that the British weren't gonna give them like everything. Like, they still got some, but not like what they expected. Like the entire Arabia Peninsula, they got some of it, but not what they thought they were gonna get. The northern bits of the Arabia Peninsula and the southern bit, Yemen, Oman, they didn't get that, but they still got. I mean, they still got a good chunk of it. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, the British. I don't know. Would I say the British lied? I don't know. Especially with the Arabs knowing that the British probably wasn't gonna give them what they expected, and it still helped them revolt against the Ottomans.
A chance to turn things around and possibly avoid a total collapse. But from this moment on, it became unavoidable. The Greek Revolution was one of the biggest, if not the biggest nail in the Ottoman coffin. It would form the basis of a new Greek national identity, form the basis of conflict and antagonism that would last to this very day. And from the first Greek day of independence onward, the Ottomans would huddle from one disaster into another.
So that's why Greeks and Ottomans are always beefing with each other. Not Ottomans, but like Turkish people. I thought that happened, like, I mean, freaking hell, what happened to my throat there? Huh. But I thought that started, like, the whole beef between the Greeks and Ottomans started from, like, the Byzantine era, when the Ottomans were now, like, conquering, like, that region around where the Greeks were. I thought that's where the conflict between the Greeks and Turks started.
First to take,
I didn't know it started from like
French,
the Greek
who
War of
invaded
Independence.
Ottoman Algeria 2 years after Greek independence and made it a colonial province of the French Empire. Also 2 years after Greek independence, the Egyptians revolted, took Jerusalem and Damascus, and gained great autonomy. The Ottomans had to get the British for help to regain control over the Levant, but the British would only do so in exchange for Cyprus. Both had to recognize Egyptian autonomy, marking the first time in centuries that an Arab nation asserted itself again on the world stage, with a ruler intent on modernizing and building a modern Arab monarchy. However, we don't know how that would have gone, as Britain took advantage of this fledgling little new state.
Egypt is Arab? Egypt is Arab? I thought Egypt was North African. Egypt is Arab? I know Arabs are in Egypt, but I never viewed Egypt as Arab. I just viewed Egypt as North African. But I know it has a bunch of Arabs in it because it's right next to the Arabian Peninsula, so that's normal. But okay. I don't know. If somebody want to elaborate on that in the comments, you can.
Occupying it, and Egypt was thereby forced into another empire. 2 years before the end of the Greek Revolution, the Ottomans, in an attempt to clamp down and gain more control over their European lands, cracked down on the Bektashi Muslims of Albania. which resulted in a decade of continuous Albanian uprisings. In 1931, Bosnian Muslim landlords rebelled against land reform. The uprising was brutally crushed, and in an attempt to solve the problem, the Ottomans split the lands up into new administrative sections, giving some of it to their Serbian vassals, which created new problems that themselves kept continuously creating new problems to this day. The Serbs themselves kept having uprisings, and so did the Macedonians, the Montenegrins, the Bulgarians, and the Greeks, who were still under Ottoman rule. All this turmoil and chaos convinced outsiders that this place was falling apart and up for grabs. It also fell into a time of greater Russian imperial ambitions under a growing nationalist pan-Slavic movement, a movement that dreamed of a greater Slavic empire, who referred to Istanbul not as Constantinople, but as Tsaringrad, a future capital for such an empire, proclaiming that the turmoil was proof that the Ottomans were mistreating their
Pan-Slavism. You know, it's funny because I am very certain that Pan-Slavism is probably, like, out of all the pan movements, I think Pan-Slavism is the most likely, like, most realistic one to actually happen. It's the closest thing that could happen, because Slavs, they're quite similar. I mean, and they recently diverged, very recently, compared to, like, Germanic peoples and whatnot. I mean, Arabs are also the same way. Arabs can still very much communicate with each other and whatnot, but the thing with the Arab world is that the Arab world, they have, like, too much corruption with governments, politicians that only care about themselves, all that other problem that I've talked about before. But the thing is, the only thing that's stopping Pan-Slavism is the nationalism within the Slavic countries. If it didn't have that nationalism, that honestly probably could have worked out.
Christians, and referring to the previously mentioned treaty that gave them the role as the guarantor of safety and protector of Christians in the Islamic world, the Russians invaded in 1854 during what became known as the Crimean War. And it seemed like the Ottomans were in for the next big disaster, possibly even the final one. However, the Russians may have been correct about the Ottomans falling apart, but they had gotten greedy. And with their invasion that was clearly aimed at Constantinople, they upset the European balance of powers. Those European nations may have hated each other, but they certainly didn't want a massive, overly powerful Russian empire dominating the Mediterranean and the Balkans. So in the end, the Russians accomplished something completely different, something that was almost impossible a year before, an alliance between the British, the French and the Austrians that forced the Russians out of the Balkans, and for good measure also sank the Russian fleet. But the resulting peace agreement exposed how the Ottomans' supposed allies and saviors were in reality just there to snatch bits and pieces for themselves. The British got even more concessions over Cyprus. The French gained the title of protector of Christianity in the Ottoman lands. And they would in the future themselves use it just like the Russians as a crowbar to justify wars. And the Ottomans had to give up even more control over Serbia and Romania. By this time, it would take drastic measures to save the empire, which the Ottomans conducted in 1856 by abolishing the Islamic Sharia-based social order, inviting foreigners to help build a new army, restructured the state to have equal direct representation for all ethnic groups, and even built a nice modern palace in European style as they adopted European dress codes. But these changes were mainly cosmetic and didn't have much impact on changing the overall situation, as things continued mostly.
Yeah, pal. The main reason why the empire is collapsing is because you're not making that revenue from the new world anymore. It's funny because I literally argued with someone a long time ago about this, on like why the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and I was like, bro, the main reason why the Ottomans even like went downhill is because as soon as the new world was discovered and new trade routes to India was discovered, that was it. Like, there was nothing the Ottomans could do. Well, it depends. Because closer you get to World War One, the more least likely it is for the Ottomans to save the empire. It's like the Soviet Union, right? Like the Soviet Union got weaker and weaker and weaker. So over time, it's like for you to save the Soviet Union, you need to start like most likely immediately, like right after World War II, right? Same logic with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, like what we're like in 1850, right? Yeah, Loki. It's like the most the Ottomans could do is just try and keep the empire, but they would have probably lost a lot of territory with that. But if you go back like early 1800s, the Ottomans could have done something. If you go back earlier, they could have done something, but the thing is the Ottoman Empire and its geographic location was such a horrible spot to be in. It was a really bad spot to be in. Like like what he said, they were closed in, they were trapped. So it's like, how in the world do you fix that? How in the world? Like the best thing that you could do is do reforms. Or at least that's the best that I can think of. But even then, it's like some groups just do not want autonomy. Even though I personally believe that autonomy is the best thing to do. I think independence is quite overrated. But some groups don't care. They just want like full-on independence. So it's like, you know, even if you do reforms, is that really... Oh! Another thing, the Janissaries. The Janissaries were also another reason why the Ottoman Empire, like, decayed to. Yeah, those were the two main reasons. The fact that the New World was discovered, new trade routes were discovered in India, and the Janissaries. The Janissaries were, the Janissaries were literally like a stage 4 cancer. Honestly, like, you get rid of the Janissary problem, like, half of the Ottomans' problems would be solved. It would delay the Ottoman Empire's decline a lot. But
as usual. Next came a rebellion of Serbs in Herzegovina who had risen up against Bosnian Muslim landlords. The 1860s brought a Greek insurrection in Crete and an uprising of Arabs in Lebanon, and this was followed by the next great disaster. In 1876, the Bulgarians rose up in revolt. Probably sick and tired of it all, the Ottomans made a monumentally stupid and horrible decision. Instead of just putting down the insurrections as they had done so many times before, they sent an army that raped, burnt, robbed, pillaged, slaughtered, and massacred its way through Bulgaria.
Damn! Damn! And these are the same Turks in my comments who are like,
Bulgarian did war crimes to Turks in the Balkans.
damn. So it seems like the Turks did it first.
To pacify the place by terrorizing its people, tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered. What this war is most remembered for are the mass beheadings. Every time an Ottoman army would march into a town, city or village, all men aged 14 to 50 were gathered together in the town square and beheaded as the town was forced to watch.
Oh my... Yo! Yo! Oh! That low-key made me want to throw up. I'm not even gonna lie. That low-key maybe... Oh my gosh, wow. That's right, I get like Turks in my comments who like spam that. Like, oh my goodness.
Oh, the West is anti-Turkish, the West is anti-Turkish.
Even though I don't really believe that to be the case, I don't really think the West cares that much about Turkey because Turkey isn't really an adversary like China or Russia is. But the Balkans, I get people in my comments who spam me like, oh my gosh, the Balkans, right? Like, Oh my gosh, the Balkans, Balkan country do war crime to the Turkish people, right? Bro. It's the Balkans, bro. It's the Balkans. But, and correct me if I'm wrong here, before, when the Ottomans were just putting down these uprisings, they were not doing this. Like, this was not like, usually when the uprising happened, the rebels would go, commit some, basically terrorism acts and whatnot against the civilian population, or typically some cases they do, some cases they don't. It depends, to be honest. But bro, say what you want, but I am 100% certain that up to this point, nobody did something that probably did, because it's the Balkans, and the Balkans have a reputation of doing like this type of stuff. So I would not be like shocked if that was the case. But okay, honestly, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense why Bulgaria has animosity towards Turkey, because Bulgaria was in that region for a while, and up until very recently, early modern history, not even early, just modern history, did the whole Bulgarian feel an animosity to the Turks. That was like, I was like aware of that, but before then, bro, nothing like this happened. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, nothing like this, bro. Bro, what the hell? Like, this, even if they were rebels doing that, surely they were not doing that on the scale that of what the Ottomans were doing here. So, like he said before, the Ottomans had plenty of rebellions, and I mean, they just put it down willy-nilly, went about their day. But this, wow, this is unprecedented. That's the word I'm looking for. This is unprecedented. Like,
however, by 1876, newspapers were in wide circulation and had become part of everyone's daily life. Most nations had by then agreed to basic sets of rules of war that forbade the intentional slaughter of civilians. French, British, German, Italians, Russian, South American, and American journalists were all over Bulgaria, witnessing and writing about these atrocities. From one end of the world to the other, the news of what the Ottomans were doing spread, and the world united in disgust and condemnation of the Ottomans. Seeing all this,
yeah, bro, that's the thing. It's like, bro, I know I'm gonna get people in my comments who are gonna say,
but the people did the same thing to Turkish civilians.
bro, not on this scale, bro. Like, if they were doing it on this scale, I am certain that there would be documentations. The whole world would be looking at it. Everybody would have easily, because guys, there's a point of being brutal that you can do. Everybody has certain limits, but there's a point where everybody will just be like, yo, bro, what the hell? Like, yo, like, damn, bro, like, that's messed up. Even the Germans in World War II reached their levels of disgust, i.e. the way how the Croats were towards, I don't want to talk about that because World War II topic tends to get videos demonetized. But even the Germans reached their point. They were doing a lot of already disgusting things. So, but still, because I know people are going to try and equalize it, but this is just unprecedented, bro. So unprecedented that all the European powers are unanimously like disgusted by it. Like, that's how you know it's bad. That's how you know it's really bad. Like, I always wondered why Bulgarians had such high animosity towards Turks, considering that they were Turkicized Slavs. Well, not Turkicized, but they were, what's the word? They assimilated and became Slavs. Turkish descent, basically. This makes a lot of sense now. This makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense. I just originally thought that, oh, you know, Turkish rule, like, nobody wants to be, you know, people just want to be their own country, and that was that. But this is like whole different breed. And it's funny because I actually know about how Bulgaria would eventually kind of just like deport all the Turks to salve its Turkish question. I don't know about what Bulgaria did to its Turkish population eventually, but that happened later. Right? Well, when Bulgaria had its clear animosity towards, you know, Turkey and Turks. But I'm saying all this because it's like, bro, you seriously cannot defend this, bro. Like, I don't care who you are, what you are. Bro, just don't even try to equalize this in my comments. If it was bad, and, you know, I'm sure the rebels were attacking civilians anyways, but they weren't doing it on this scale. Like, they were not doing this on this scale. If it was on this scale, it would have been well documented by now for us, for all to see. So,
the Russians invaded, and this time, nobody was going to help the Ottomans. This war, the 11th Russo-Turkish War, was an even bigger disaster for the Ottomans than the independence of Greece and all its previous military defeats. In the previous years, the Ottomans had tried to modernize their army, British and American rifles, German artillery, and British ironclad ships. But the Ottomans had not trained their army on how to use modern equipment and still relied on 200-year-old outdated defensive military tactics. They just hunkered down in trenches, hoping the Russians would do suicidal 17th century bayonet charges. Instead, the Russians shelled them into oblivion with modern artillery. The invading Russian army was also welcomed as liberators by the Bulgarians, Romanians, Armenians, and Serbs. The British and French only intervened and stopped the Russians when they were only a few miles away from Istanbul. In the resulting peace treaty, the Russians annexed the last remaining Ottoman lands in the northern Caucasus and East Armenia. Romania declared full independence and became a Russian ally. Montenegro declared independence. Serbia doubled in size, declared full independence, and became a Russian ally. Bulgaria officially became an autonomous state in the Ottoman Empire, but unofficially was independent and allied with Russia. A mass exodus of Muslims fled these new states in what became one of the world's first recorded refugee crises. In total, 1.5 million who swamped the cities of the empire in slums and squalor. The modernized Ottoman Balkan army had been wiped out. The Ottoman buffer between it and Russia was gone. In any future war, the Russians could now just march right up to Istanbul. And it has also started something else. The Armenians had welcomed the invading Russians in eastern Armenia as liberators, and Western Armenia was still in the Ottoman Empire. The Russians now declared themselves to be the protectors of the Armenians in that empire. The Ottomans now looked with ever-deepening suspicions on them. Something started happening that would, a few decades down the road, lead to one of the worst crimes of the century. However, the end of that war gave the Ottomans also a brief respite.
bro, I swear, I have people try to look at me and tell me that, like Turkish bots. When I say Turkish bots, I mean like not all Turks, but just like bots in my bro. I have people try to tell me that the Armenian genocide didn't happen, bro. I'm not even arguing with people like that.
It came through another
I'm not even arguing with people like that.
Started during that war, something unexpected that must have seemed almost comedic at the time. During the war, when the Serbs marched south and doubled their land in size, they invaded Greece. The Austrians threatened them into getting out of Greece, but the Serbs started something else with that. The Ottomans still controlled vast patches of Balkan lands, but in these lands, intoxicated by nationalist delusions of grandeur and even race, Serb, Greek, Bulgarian, and Albanian nationalists started killing each other before the Ottomans were even gone. so they could have more for themselves once those Ottomans were actually gone. For centuries, these people had lived together in peace and harmony, but with the idea of separation also came the need for new ideas, justifications, and fictions around which to unite a new nation around. In that climate, what separated people became more important than what they had in common. And what differentiated people often was arbitrary. Bosnians are not Turks, but Slavs who converted to Islam centuries ago. So are they Serbs of different faith, as some Serb nationalists claim? Or are they foreign invaders, as other Serb nationalists claim? Or something else entirely?
The Slavs are not indigenous to the Balkans, by the way. They're not indigenous to the Balkans. All those Slavic people, they're not indigenous to the Balkans.
Slavs that migrated to northern Macedonia Greeks? Are Orthodox Bulgarians Greeks? Who gets what cultural heritage? Should all Slavs be in one state? Should Greece have what it claims to have had 1,000 years ago? As the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the Balkans, the newly emergent entities started engaging each other in hostility. Serbs against Greeks, against Bulgarians and vice versa, over who the people in the remaining lands were and should be part of. 30 years before the Ottomans had even left those lands. These fights were the forerunners of wars soon to come, but also the harbinger of greater catastrophes to befall the Balkans in the closing years of the 20th century. During the war with Russia, the other European powers met at a conference in Berlin where they divided Africa up amongst themselves, but also secretly divided up the remaining Ottoman lands in Africa without even telling them. The British made Cyprus a full protectorate and occupied Egypt, which was technically still an Ottoman protectorate. The French invaded Tunisia and made it part of their empire. The Ottomans were furious, but there was little to nothing they could do. Within a time period of only 70 years, the once mightiest empire of the hemisphere had shrunken down to a fifth of its former size. A quarter of its population was still Christian, but it had lost almost all it had in Europe besides northern Macedonia, northern Greece, Rumelia, and Crete. All its African vassals were gone, with the exception of Libya, which was basically just a scrap of sand and not worth that much. The Caucasus had slipped away into the hands of Russia, who were by now their biggest threat and right at their doorstep. The Mediterranean was now mostly under British control, and in the remaining Arab lands, the empire had lost much of its legitimacy as an Islamic spiritual leader, as the Arabs increasingly turned away to seek new leaders and solutions. In this mess, a group of idealistic young men would lash out in an attempt to save what was left, but in the end would only bring upon themselves the end of the empire.
The Young Turk movement. This is chapter 6. Honestly, if you made it all the way here to the end of this video, make sure you like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for me, comment it down below in the comments. Another excellent video, excellent reaction, man. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're new. Check out my other reactions. My Greek War of Independence definitely should be on the end screen that you're seeing right here if you haven't watched it already. And goodbye.